This is Mary McCarthy with the Data Tea, starting this week fashionably late. I think I'm going to make that a thing because, before the show starts, I meet the guest in the virtual studio. Delighted this week to have one of my favorite people in the data space, Prukalpa, who is the co-founder of Atlan. Prukalpa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Yeah, I've been following you for a while. Heard you speak at Data Council, of course, earlier this year. And I wanted to know more about you. I went and did a deep dive on some of your older things, all the way back to your TED Talk, which was, I think, only 2017, was it? 2018?
Probably 2016 or something.
Okay, so you gave a TED Talk about the work you were doing in your first major role before Atlan. So let's start with that. Why don't you tell me what your career journey is, starting with the talk that you sort of gave as your TED Talk?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I guess I've been a data practitioner my whole life. My co-founder Varun and I think we were like the proverbial 21-year-olds who were like, we want to go change the world. So we were like, hey, there are these large-scale problems like national level healthcare and poverty alleviation, and they don't use data, and it feels like they should be using data. So let's go do something about that. And so we founded a company called Social Cups, and our model very quickly turned into that we basically became the data team for our customers. We were typically working with folks like the United Nations or the World Bank or the Gates Foundation. Obviously, they did not have data teams or the modern data stack or any of that, right? And so we just became their data team. And I think that's really where I learned everything that I learned about building and running data teams, and how complex and chaotic they can get. So on one hand, we were dealing with what seemed like dream projects. Like at one point, we were dealing with data for 500 million Indian citizens and billions of pixels of satellite imagery a day. So really, truly dream projects, right, for a data practitioner.
Projects that affect the lives of people who...
Yeah, and just the kind of we were solving poverty alleviation and clean energy and just incredible problems at incredible scale in 50 countries around the world. It was just, it was very, very lucky to be, to even have the chance to work with that kind of data and on those kinds of problems, right? But on the other hand, on the inside, every day was chaos. I remember there was this 6-month period where I literally did not leave office. We slept in, we had 8 beds in office because we wouldn't leave because there was just, every day was firefighting. I feel like I went through every fire drill that existed. I've had a cabinet minister call me and say, Prukalpa, the number on this dashboard doesn't look right. And I've literally, I've opened up my laptop and I've, been freaking out. And then I realized that there's a 2x spike in the data in a day, and that just it's not possible. And then called my project manager, who calls my analyst, who calls my engineer. Takes us 8 hours to figure out what went wrong. And that was just the story of our lives, right? I mean, we were spending a ton of time on solving just collaboration chaos. The data teams are super diverse, analysts, engineers, scientists, business. They all have their own tooling preferences and skill sets and their own way of working. And that just led to we were spending 50-60% of our time.
The data you were working with, in lots of contexts, is hugely diverse, right?
Exactly.
Solving big problems, but with, I think, state data, obviously agency data, maybe from these humanitarian agencies, and I guess working 24 hours a day or in the office to try to make something of it.
Pretty much, yeah. I think we started with the worst kind of data that exists, right? I mean, we were dealing with on one hand geospatial satellite imagery, so you're literally converting you're doing machine learning on image data to convert it into something that makes sense. On the other hand, literally PDF data that you're converting into something you can use. And so yeah, absolutely. I mean, very, very diverse kinds of data. And with that, figuring out how you can take that and actually use it to solve, honestly, pretty important problems, right? I mean, if we would get this wrong, we would, you would actually change the life of a human being if you get this wrong, right? And so I think, also a lot of pressure to get it right.
So that was Social Cops, the name of the program, the organization that you founded. Is that still going? Is your co-founder still running Social Cops?
Well, actually, no. My co-founder and I both transitioned to like building Atlan. So Hightouch is still a community. Like we still do a ton of work in just like as a community to like help out problems in the data science for social good space. Atlan was built actually as an internal tool at Social Cops. So for 2 years, we built the product for ourselves. We ran 200 projects throughout. Like Atlan was never supposed to be a product we sold to anybody else. Like we literally like built the product because we just wanted a better way to work as a team ourselves.
So as a data team, you were faced with the buy versus build, and there wasn't a product out there that served your purposes of creating a tool for your team to work in, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we actually tried to buy it. So, I mean, legit, we ran an evaluated, I think, 10 tools back then. And then I still remember there was this one startup that was at least directionally in the right direction. And so we wrote them this email with 20 feature requests. And we were like, if you can commit to this in your roadmap in the next year, we will buy. And then they got back saying $20,000 per feature. And we were like, okay, we can't afford that. so we were truly forced to build. Like we did not want to buy a product. Like we were truly forced to build Atlan for ourselves.
Right. That's where the best innovation often happens, right? When you have no choice, or maybe you can't afford what's out there, right? So that is the founding of Atlan, the product that you used in-house in Social Cops. And then what's the story? When did you say we're gonna make this a company?
Yeah. So we basically got to this point where our team had become 6 times more agile over a period of 2 years. So we went on to, at Social Cops, we built India's national data platform, which is the largest public sector data lake of its kind. But what was really cool about that project was it was built by an 8-member team in 12 months, 4 of whom had never pushed a line of code to production before. And it was probably the fastest of its kind for a project of its scale. We were a global partner for the United Nations on the SDG agenda and how to drive data science on that. And like we were just, honestly, we were still a pretty small company. Like the only reason we were winning these projects was because our pitch was we can do this in a month, and everybody else was going to take 3 or 6 months to do it. And so we realized we ended up building tooling that was more powerful than we'd earlier intended. But we also started picking up on a very early sense then, which back then actually was an early trend. I guess now it's a lot more mainstream, but which is that data teams were starting to become a lot more mainstream as an organizational function, right? Roles like chief data officer or head of data or analytics, like it was becoming a lot more commonplace inside organizations. And so we said, hey, like these tools we built for ourselves, if we were able to make our team, like supercharge our team so much, if we were sort of to like open this up for every data team in the world, what could that do, right? And I think that sort of was that initial sort of spark. And in some ways, I think, software, the beautiful thing about software is that the purest goal of software is you can build this one thing that everybody uses. And you can actually truly, like, in a decade, actually like impact like possibly every organization out there in the world, right? Like I still like think about, like, there's this really cool, I don't know if you saw this, but like when NASA sent up the Mars rover, and there's this like really cool picture in like, command center, and there's collaborating on Slack. And that's just such a beautiful moment, right? Like there's just, here's software that actually helps, NASA do amazing things, right?
I think like bringing together humanity and in technology, or in some cases in a line of code.
Yeah. And so I think was the spark for us, which is that we've been able to achieve so much as a team ourselves, and we could continue to do this, and we were doing really well as a company. But if we just open this up, could we almost power hundreds and thousands of teams just like us? And what could they go do to the world, right? And I think that was really the spark of how we started thinking about Atlan.
I think that you have such a unique story and voice, in part because so many people in tech, many people might consider the opposite, like mission-driven organizations, like the humanitarian world, think that you can only get satisfaction if you're doing what in name is the value-based mission-driven thing. And I've experienced this personally. I worked as a reporter, which people tend to think is values-driven, mission-driven. And what I've discovered is that you can have that in any endeavor, that you can bring humanity together with technology. You can have the values that you care about. Like in your case, you started out with serious concrete projects to alleviate poverty. And that doesn't mean you can't also have corporate clients. And I think it's powerful that you're showing that and, leading the way. Did you get pushback at all when you went from social cops to Atlan from that kind of perspective? Like, where's the mission-driven values? Or did people really get what you were doing?
I mean, when we started Atlan, nobody got what we were doing, right? I mean, back then, data ops was not a thing. Modern data stack was not a thing. Like people were like, "What the hell are you doing?" In general, we went through this abyss. Like it was literally like there were like 1.5 years of everybody saying, "What the hell are you doing?" And then suddenly everyone's like, "Oh my god, the modern data stack's a thing! Like this is the coolest thing you can do." So
it all happened fast. It's all in the past few years.
I mean, just the last year or a year and a half that it's cool to be like Snowflake IPO'd, and I think around that time that everything sort of just exploded. But before that, nobody really got what we were doing.
So for people who don't know, where does Atlan fit in exactly in the modern data stack? And when I say people who don't know, that includes me, because I've worked in, for example, various data governance tools. Right now, I'm kind of studying and playing around with some data reliability and data observability. Where in all that does Atlan fit exactly?
Yeah. So the way I think about Atlan is almost as that metadata layer or the glue that binds together all the different tools and the people in the data stack, right? So our entire thesis is built around this concept of diversity. Like we believe that the only reality in the data ecosystem is going to be diversity. Diversity of the type of people, like analyst, engineer, analytics engineer, scientist, business user. And each of these people have their own tooling preferences and skill sets and their own DNA in the way that they work, right? And what that means is on a daily basis, a ton of chaos. These people and tools don't work together as effectively as they can. And so what's developed today is almost I think of as the data stack or the data plane to the modern data stack, right? And that's where you see ingestion, you see warehousing, transformation, BI, reverse ETL, or I guess data activation is the new cool term, right? That's sort of what I think of as the data stack. And the data stack needs a control plane. And the control plane is likely going to be in the metadata layer. And the metadata layer to me is almost a collaboration layer, which is how do you help these, almost what like GitHub is to engineering teams or Figma is to design team. What does that real like for the team, not for the individual user? Right? There's DBT built for analytics engineers or business teams will use like Looker but like what does that team collaboration layer look like? And the second, how do you actually have the tools work better together? Because if you have a unified metadata layer, so we think at Atlan about, we call ourselves an active metadata platform. And we think of this a lot as how can you really activate metadata? You talk about data governance, right? Today, traditionally in this ecosystem, people have taken metadata from a bunch of different tools and you go put it in this one tool. You call it the data catalog or you call it the data governance tool, whatever you call it. But the problem with that approach is that you actually create like one more siloed tool to solve a siloed problem. Like, and if you think about an end user, if I'm in a dashboard and I'm like, can I trust this dashboard? The last thing I want to do is jump to this other tool and then search for the dashboard and figure out, whether the lineage broke or not, right? Like I want context where I am when I need it. And so we think about this concept of activation art, which is how do you not just bring together this metadata, make it intelligent for people to use, but how do you take it back into the day-to-day workflows of teams? So very deep integrations into Jira, Slack, BI tools, Chrome, web browsers, to actually help, create flow and create experiences for people the way that they use it.
So if you were selling to me, or your top salesperson came to me, I would say that's exactly what we need. Every team needs that. We don't need any more tools, but if we have a tool that ties all our tools together, yes, that's what we need. But I would say that's hard to do. And how have you made Atlan able to do that?
Yeah. No, you're right. It is hard to do. I mean, we failed ourselves as a data team. When we were a data team ourselves, we failed 3 times setting up a data catalog. And I think that's the problem. The problem is that traditionally, we've thought that the solution to this problem is I'm going to take a bunch of metadata, I'm going to go put it in the silo tool, and then I'm going to get a bunch of people in my team to document stuff. That doesn't work. And so I think that's why we need a different approach to solve the chaos problem, right? And so for us at Atlan, we focused on a few things. The first is, how easy is it going to be to set up and automate as much context as possible that you can automatically create. So we actually, we literally, we have this internal saying that we call 30 minutes to aha, and you should be able to without needing a data engineer, because for me as a data leader, the worst thing was getting data engineering time. It was terrible. Data engineers will never give you time, right? And so you can basically set up native connections fully through a UI to Snowflake, Looker, dbt, all these tools, bring in your data assets without needing an engineer.
So very, very straightforward user interface.
Very straightforward to set up. Very straightforward. And how do you automate, right? So for example, we parse through SQL query history to auto construct lineage. We have a bot that auto recommends column description. So anywhere, if you have one column description, we leverage lineage and we will just auto create it anywhere else, right? And so there's a ton of automation you can do to actually make this a lot easier. Second is the human element. People forget the human element. I think everyone thinks you can, and I think this is what most people miss. Human context is real. Tribal knowledge is real. It's not going away from organizations. But then how do you harness this in the right way? And so this is where our concept of really embedding into collaborative workflows of teams. So for example, we have a really deep two-way integration with Slack. Any conversation that you have in Slack about a data asset automatically gets attached to the data asset in Atlan. And it's a two-way thing. The same thing with Jira. So if any issue is created, it's a reference to the same data asset.
So that's transforming its own metadata layer.
It's creating its own metadata layer, right? And so the challenge that people have is that, when you think of it as a one-off exercise, which is let me go clear this backlog. But the thing is that it's not a one-off exercise. This context is continually changing and people are answering these questions. It's just that it's on email and Slack and 15 other broken tools. So if you're able to make that a part of the day-to-day workflows of the way teams operate, then you can actually create and construct a lot of this context and make it available to the rest of you. So I think that's really the second aspect of this. And I think if you do those two things right, I think people really underestimate the importance of user experience and things like that. Where we found as a data team that when you get that right, then the way your team works changes, and that is important. So we think of ourselves actually as a culture enabler inside the organization, right? How do you actually help? People bring us in at this time where they're almost moving from a data service mindset to a data product mindset, which is making everything reusable and reproducible, and because at some point, data analysts are not going to be able to scale. You need to be able to make things reusable and reproducible for you to be able to scale your data organization. That's the perfect time to bring in Atlan. And so we actually invested, we've made a very conscious choice as a software company to invest a lot in actually community and what we call a culture enablement program to help data teams through that transition of actually building a great data culture inside their teams.
Absolutely. I want to bring in a comment from a viewer, Millie S. Hi, Millie. And she said a few things. She said, it is funny how long it takes spaces to think about team structures and cultures. And she loved your quote, people always forget the human element. And I would absolutely agree with that. There's a line that's in some of the articles you've written, Prukalpa, that's metadata in itself has become big data. I don't know if you coined that, but I love it. And it's really getting at the fact that, again, we have so many tools, so many systems, so many sources of data. And increasingly, we're going to have to take account of how to bring them all together and that study that made metadata in itself as a thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've just honestly scratched the surface of what metadata can do. right? Today, we just think of a few use cases, right? Maybe data discovery, catalog, governance, observability. But if you really think about what metadata can do, you can power a ton of use cases across security, quality control, cost optimization. So, like, for example, if you know that 90% of your users log in to access this particular dashboard at 10 a.m. on a Monday morning, you should be able to use it to auto scale up your compute clusters in Snowflake to make sure that like your users have the best experience, auto update the data pipeline at 9:45, and auto scale down everything an hour later when your users log out, right? And like that, like a ton of use cases, right? Like programmatic governance, or even like purging stale data assets, right? Like if you know what's getting used and what's not getting used, you could auto purge and auto archive. And I think that's really where the future. I mean, I know we've been like talking about bundling and unbundling forever, but we're probably never going to be like 100% bundled data stack, right? And so then to create that ideal intelligent data management platform dream, metadata actually holds the key for it. And if you can truly activate metadata to not just solve the use cases of today, but actually solve a ton of these use cases of tomorrow, you can actually achieve the best of both worlds, which is you have best in class tools which are interoperable, and at the same time you achieve the experience that you actually get from a bundled data stack if you use metadata the right way. And so I really think that's I guess I'm dedicating my life to this, so I better be bullish about this. But but I'm really bullish about the future of what metadata can do for the data stack.
Right, and that sort of answers actually the next question I was going to ask you, which is what are your predictions for the next few years of the modern data stack? But for you, it's that sort of recognition and coming into its own of the importance of metadata.
I think metadata will emerge as there will be a active metadata layer, and metadata will hold the key to actually unlock a ton of use cases, better experiences across the stack, and just build that, hopefully intelligent data management. Like make the like we've been talking about augmented data management platform for like years. Like my real hope, I don't know if this prediction, hope, dream, whatever you call it, but I really hope in the next like 3 or 4 years we get there. And I think metadata can help us get there.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I will dig into Atlan after the call. So I wanted to hear it from your perspective. I want to get a bit more personal now. You are a founder. There are not a lot in this space, or in a lot of spaces, a lot of women founders. You might be tired of asking that question, or being asked that question, but I'm asking it. What on a personal level gave you that drive and, I would say, almost lack of hesitation? Because I think for a lot of women, there's that, the world hasn't taught me that I'm supposed to be a founder creator, so I don't go for it, whether that's conscious or not. What gave you that impetus to just go out and do it?
Yeah. I think role models matter a lot in life. For me, my role model was my mom. My mom, actually, when she was 21, she invented a device and she got it patented, and she actually got funding for it. But unfortunately, she couldn't be an entrepreneur when she was 21 because it was too much risk for her family and things like that. But I saw her, like when I was in school, she was part of the founding team of this education startup. They were working out of my home, 4 people working out of my home. I just saw how passionate mom was, right? And I think that drove a lot for me of what I wanted work to feel like. But I think the one thing that for me, I think, and this is the environment and I think this is what I hope we can create for a lot more women and girls around the world, right? I don't think I ever felt different. I don't feel different. I don't feel like, and for example, we try to create this at Atlan as well. Like, I don't think you want, like as a woman, you don't want to be treated differently. You just want to be treated as an equal. And if you truly are treated like an equal, like I was always treated as Prukalpa, not Prukalpa the girl. And I think that just made, like in my head, I don't think I ever think of myself differently. And if you're able to create this, like for example, I remember one of our very first women engineers in the company, she came to me and she said, I've been in companies where the diversity ratio, women, female to male, is actually much higher. But in all of those companies, I always felt like I was the woman engineer. And at Atlan, I don't feel like I was the woman engineer. I just feel like I'm an engineer. And I think that's what you need to create. If you create that for all kinds of diversity, whether it's women, like there's so many age, gender, like sexual orientation, all of those, all forms of diversity, right? As long as they just feel like they're the person and not qualified as to this person is from this race or this person is from this gender, I think people then think of themselves very differently. And I think that environment, personally for me, I think that environment mattered a lot.
Yeah, no, there's so much to unpack there, but I think from your personal experience, the power of early experiences, whether it's from home, some people get that fortunately in their education. Sometimes it can even be through just a teacher, even if they're not in a particularly progressive education environment. But I'm glad that worked for you and that you're aware as a founder that's not necessarily the case for everybody, and that we do have to promote diversity, and that diversity is more than numbers. You can say I have X number of women or minorities, but it's also that feeling. That's a very important thing to point out. So
100%.
Yeah, and I actually wrote a blog this week about in the data industry, because I was struck by at Data Council, where I heard you speak, I was struck by the general white maleness of it. And I raised that issue to a few people there. And I think that it's something that in the data industry, we need to make sure we're not complacent about. The numbers are, I believe, that about a quarter of data workers in the US are women, but fewer than 10% combined, I think, are Latino or Black. So I think that the more we talk about these issues, I know within Atlan, everyone I've spoken to there, that there's just a huge emphasis on that within the workplace, which is something that I really admire about what you do. We are almost out of time. I do want to mention also on that note that for every episode of Data Tea, we make a donation to women's empowerment organization called Women in Data. We make a $250 donation in the guest's name in appreciation of your time, and that goes towards their scholarship fund to promote, obviously, women in our field. I'm a big believer in that, just because obviously for the intellectual value of what we do, and with people like you getting out there and changing the world, but also even for financial empowerment. It's a type of career where women can get out there, whether they're in the US or India or anywhere in between, and change the world, but also change their families' lives. So thank you for coming on in support of Women in Data. So this has been fantastic. We'll talk again. And I know it's late for you. You're in Bangalore, so I'm gonna wrap up and let you go.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for calling. Bye.